July 18, 1942. North Africa. The Qattara Depression, 60 kilometers south of El Alamein. Private Franz Weber crouched behind a destroyed British truck at 14:30, feeling the metal sear through his uniform despite the shade it provided, watching heat waves distort the desert floor while his canteen held less than one swallow of water. 23 years old. Drafted from Bavaria 6 months earlier. Third week in Africa. The 15th Panzer Division had pushed forward at dawn, pursuing British forces retreating from German positions, and now Weber's squad was cut off, pinned down by machine gun fire from Commonwealth troops dug into a rocky outcrop 200 meters to the east. The temperature was 48 degrees Celsius. The sun was white. The air tasted like copper and dust. Weber's tongue was swollen. His lips were cracked and bleeding. He had not drunk water in 14 hours. The last canteen had been shared among 8 men at 2 o'clock that morning. Each man received approximately 80 milliliters. Not enough. Around him lay 5 other German soldiers, spread along a 30-meter line of wreckage and rocks. To his left was Corporal Erich Hartmann, age 31, veteran of Poland and France. To his right was Private Joseph Klein, age 19, arrived in Africa 2 days earlier. All of them were dehydrated. All of them had exhausted their water supply. The British machine gun fired in short bursts. 3 to 5 rounds. Professional. Disciplined. The gunner was conserving ammunition, waiting for movement. Any German who raised his head above cover died. 3 men had already tried. Their bodies lay in the sand between German and British positions. Weber pressed his back against the truck axle. Metal scorched through his uniform. He shifted position. The movement required effort. His muscles were cramping. Dehydration affected coordination, made simple actions difficult. He looked at his watch. 14:32, they had been pinned in this position for 6 hours. The British attack had come at 8:15. Artillery first. Then infantry advancing with armored support. Weber's company had been separated from the main force during the bombardment. Radio contact was lost. The retreat became disorganized. Men ran in different directions seeking cover. Weber's squad found this position, the wreckage of supply vehicles destroyed in an earlier engagement. They took cover and returned fire. The British stopped advancing, established defensive positions in the rocks, brought up a Vickers machine gun. Since then, stalemate. No reinforcements would come. The main German force was 8 kilometers west, unaware of their situation. The British controlled the ground between. Escape was impossible. The machine gun covered every approach. Weber looked at Klein. The boy's face was gray. His eyes were unfocused. He was not sweating anymore. That was a bad sign. When the body stopped sweating in heat like this, organ failure followed quickly. "How much water do you have?" Weber asked. Klein shook his head. "None." Weber checked his own canteen. 1 swallow remained. Perhaps 60 milliliters. He had been saving it, rationing carefully, but watching Klein deteriorate changed the calculation. He crawled to Klein's position. The movement drew machine gun fire. Bullets ricocheted off rocks. Weber pressed flat, waited, then covered the last 3 meters in one burst of motion. He reached Klein and offered the canteen. Klein's hand trembled as he took it. He raised it to his lips, tilted it back. Water touched his tongue. His throat worked. He swallowed. His eyes closed. Then he lowered the canteen and offered it back to Weber with water still inside. Weber pushed it toward Klein. "Finish it." Klein shook his head. "You need it too." The machine gun fired again. Both men pressed against the rocks. Dust and stone fragments rained down. When the firing stopped, Weber took the canteen. It was empty. Klein had finished the water. Weber felt relief. The boy would survive a few more hours. Maybe long enough for rescue. Maybe not. At 1500 hours, the wind shifted. It came from the northeast now, carrying the smell of diesel fuel and cordite. It also carried voices. British voices. Speaking English. Weber could not understand the words, but he recognized the language. The British position was close. Perhaps 150 meters. Close enough to hear conversations during pauses in the fighting. Close enough to smell their cigarette smoke. Hartmann crawled to Weber's position. "We need water," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Klein won't last another hour. Neither will Schneider." Weber looked toward the British position. Rocks, shadows, the glint of metal. The machine gun. "Where do we get water?" "There." Hartmann pointed east. Weber saw nothing but sand and rocks. "What?" "Behind the British position. There's a well. I saw it this morning before the attack. Stone structure, about 400 meters east of their line. 400 meters behind enemy positions." "Yes." "Through their defensive line." "Yes." "While being fired on by a machine gun." "Yes." Weber stared at the desert. The idea was insane. But Klein was dying. Schneider was dying. The rest would follow within 6 hours. They could die of thirst waiting for rescue that might never come, or they could try to reach water. At 15:30, Weber made his decision. He would attempt to reach the well. Alone. At night. If he survived, he would bring back water. If he died, the attempt would not waste resources or endanger others. He told Hartmann the plan. Hartmann nodded. "Good luck." Weber waited for darkness. The sun touched the horizon at 18:45. The temperature dropped rapidly. Desert nights were cold. The stars appeared, thousands of them, more than Weber had ever seen in Bavaria. The Milky Way was a silver band across the sky. At 2000 hours, Weber began moving. He crawled on his stomach, pushing with his legs, pulling with his arms. Slow progress. Silent. The sand was still warm from the day's heat. He moved parallel to the German line first, then turned east toward the British position. After 30 minutes, he had covered 50 meters. His arms trembled. His breathing was labored. Dehydration had weakened him more than he realized. He rested, face in the sand, listening. No sounds from the British position. No machine gun fire. They knew the Germans were pinned, unable to escape. They were conserving ammunition, resting, waiting for dawn. Weber continued crawling. At 2100 hours, he reached the edge of the British defensive perimeter. He could see their positions now. Foxholes, weapon emplacements, supply crates. A few men moved among the positions, checking equipment, rotating guard duties. He watched for patterns. Guards changed every 2 hours. There was a gap in their line between two foxholes, approximately 20 meters wide. Unobserved. He could pass through if he timed it correctly. At 21:30, the guards changed. Weber waited for the new guards to settle into position, for their attention to drift, for routine to replace alertness. 15 minutes. Then he moved. Through the gap. Crawling. Not breathing. 20 meters felt like 20 kilometers. Every sound seemed amplified. The scrape of his uniform on rocks. The shift of sand under his weight. His heartbeat. No alarm sounded. No shots fired. He passed through. Behind British lines, Weber stood and walked. Running would draw attention. Walking looked like someone who belonged. He moved with purpose, as if heading to a specific position, fulfilling an assignment. The well was where Hartmann had indicated. Stone construction, ancient, perhaps Roman. A rope and bucket system. Weber approached carefully, checking for guards. The well was undefended. Water was abundant here. The British saw no need to guard it. Weber lowered the bucket. It descended into darkness with a chain rattle sound. Then the splash. He pulled the rope hand over hand. The bucket was heavy. Full. Water sloshed over the sides. He drank first. Direct from the bucket. The water was cool, clean, perfect. It hit his stomach like medicine. He felt his body responding immediately, muscles relaxing, strength returning. He drank half the bucket, then refilled it, filling every container he carried. His canteen. His helmet. A canvas bag he had brought for this purpose. As he worked, he heard voices. British voices. Close. 2 men approaching the well from the opposite direction. Weber froze. The bucket was still in his hands. His canteen was on the ground. His helmet sat beside the well, full of water. Escape was impossible. The British soldiers were 20 meters away, walking directly toward him. He calculated his options. Run. Fight. Surrender. Running would fail. They would shoot him in the back. Fighting would fail. He was 1 man, they were 2, and he was exhausted from dehydration and crawling. Surrender meant capture. Prison camp. Survival, but also failure. His squad would die of thirst. The British soldiers reached the well. Both carried rifles. One was tall, thin, wearing a corporal's stripes. The other was shorter, broader, private's insignia. They stopped when they saw Weber. All 3 men stood motionless for 5 seconds. Nobody spoke. The desert was silent except for the wind. Then the British corporal raised his rifle, not quite aiming but ready. Weber slowly raised his hands. The canvas bag slipped from his grip and hit the ground. Water spilled into the sand. The corporal spoke. English. Weber did not understand. He shook his head. The corporal repeated his words, slower, louder. Still incomprehensible. Weber responded in German. Ich verstehe nicht. The British private stepped forward. He was young, perhaps 20. His face was sunburned, peeling. He spoke in heavily accented German. You are German soldier. Yes. What are you doing here? Getting water. The corporal said something to the private. The private translated for Weber. You crossed our line to steal water. My men are dying. Dehydration. We have no water. The corporal's expression did not change. He kept his rifle ready. The private translated again. Back and forth. English to German, German to English. How many men? 6. Where? Weber gestured west. 200 meters. Behind the truck wreckage. You have been shooting at us all day. The corporal nodded. He knew the position. He had probably been directing fire at it for hours. The private spoke without translating first. His voice was quiet. If we let you take water, you will keep fighting. Yes. You will shoot at us tomorrow. Yes. Probably. Then why should we help you? Weber had no answer. The logic was correct. Humanitarian action made no tactical sense. Helping enemy soldiers survive meant facing them again in combat. The rational choice was to refuse the water, perhaps even shoot Weber here at the well. But the private was still talking, still engaging. He had not shot yet. That meant something. Weber responded carefully. Because your men are probably thirsty too. Because water is not a weapon. Because we are soldiers, not murderers. The private translated. The corporal listened, his face expressionless. Then he lowered his rifle slightly. He spoke. The private translated. My name is Corporal Michael Thompson. This is Private David Walsh. We are with the 8th Army, 2nd Battalion, Rifle Brigade. Weber understood the gesture. The corporal was humanizing himself, establishing identity, creating connection. It was the opposite of combat psychology, which required dehumanization of the enemy. Private Franz Weber. 15th Panzer Division, 2nd Company. Thompson nodded. Then he walked to the well, lowered the bucket himself, drew water, and drank. When he finished, he filled the bucket again and held it toward Weber. For your men. Weber took the bucket. His hands shook. Not from weakness now, but from disbelief. Walsh helped him fill the containers. Canteen. Helmet. Canvas bag. They worked in silence, 3 soldiers sharing a well in the middle of a war. When Weber's containers were full, Thompson spoke again. Walsh translated. How will you return? The way I came. Through your line. You will be shot. The sentries do not know about this. They will see movement, they will fire. Weber had not considered this. He had focused on reaching the well, obtaining water, nothing beyond that. The return journey was equally dangerous, perhaps more so. Now he carried heavy containers. His movement would be slower, noisier. Thompson seemed to be thinking. He exchanged words with Walsh in English. They discussed something, gesturing, debating. Then Thompson turned back to Weber. Walsh translated. "We will guide you through. Tell the sentries it is us returning from the well. You walk between us. Stay low. Do not speak. Why would you do this?" Thompson's response came through Walsh after a pause. "Because if we leave you to be shot by our own sentries, we are no better than if we shot you ourselves." They moved together. Thompson in front, Weber in the middle, Walsh behind. They approached the British line from the east, as if returning from a patrol. Thompson called out passwords, identifying himself to sentries. The sentries responded, acknowledged, let them pass. Weber walked between two enemy soldiers, carrying water back to his squad, while British riflemen stood guard 10 meters away. The situation was absurd. Impossible. Real. They reached the gap in the British line where Weber had crossed earlier. Thompson stopped. He turned to Weber and extended his hand. Weber shook it. Two soldiers. Enemy soldiers. Shaking hands in the middle of a battle. Thompson spoke. Walsh did not translate this time, but the meaning was clear in Thompson's tone. "Goodbye. Good luck." Then Weber was through the gap, crawling west, dragging the water containers, moving toward German positions. He reached his squad at 23:15. Hartmann saw him first, nearly shot him, then recognized his silhouette and lowered his weapon. Weber distributed the water. Canteen to Klein first. The boy drank desperately, choking, coughing, drinking more. Helmet to Schneider. Canvas bag shared among the others. All 6 men drank. Their dehydration was not cured, but it was arrested. They would survive the night. Tomorrow they might escape, might rejoin German forces, might be rescued. Or they might die in combat. But tonight, they would not die of thirst. Hartmann asked the obvious question. How? Weber told him. The well. The British soldiers. Thompson and Walsh. The handshake. Hartmann listened in silence. When Weber finished, Hartmann said nothing for a long time. Then, they could have shot you. Yes. They could have let you die in the desert. Yes. But they gave you water. Yes. Why? Weber did not answer. He did not understand it himself. Military logic dictated otherwise. National ideology dictated otherwise. Every propaganda speech, every training lecture, every order from superiors emphasized that the enemy was inhuman, unworthy of mercy. But Thompson had shown mercy. Walsh had helped fill the containers. They had escorted him through their own lines, risking their own military discipline, their own lives potentially, to ensure he survived. At 2 o'clock, machine gun fire erupted from the British position. Not directed at Weber's squad. Directed north. Different target. At 2:30, German artillery began landing near the British position. A counterattack. German forces were pushing east, attempting to recapture ground lost during the day's fighting. At 3 o'clock, the British began withdrawing. Weber heard vehicles starting, equipment being loaded, orders shouted in English. The 8th Army was retreating, pulling back to defensive positions closer to El Alamein. At 3:30, German troops advanced through the area. Weber's squad signaled them, identified themselves, rejoined their company. The officer in charge, Lieutenant Müller, assessed the situation. You were trapped here all day? Yes, sir. How did you survive without water? Weber hesitated. Then, we found a well, sir. Behind British lines. Müller accepted this. He did not ask for details. There were more important concerns. The advance was continuing. The company needed to move forward. Weber's squad joined the advance. They moved east through the positions the British had occupied hours earlier. Weber passed the well. He looked at it in the dawn light. Stone walls. Ancient construction. Rope and bucket. 2 British soldiers had given him water there. Thompson and Walsh. He did not know if they had survived the night's fighting. Probably not. Artillery had been heavy. Casualties on both sides were always high during these night engagements. Weber continued walking. Klein was beside him, alive because of water shared by enemy soldiers. Schneider was alive. All of them were alive. At 6 o'clock, the sun rose. The temperature began climbing. By 10 o'clock, it would reach 45 degrees again. Men would be thirsty again. The war would continue. But something had changed. Weber could not define it precisely. Some understanding about the nature of the conflict, about the humanity that persisted despite the violence. The war was not about good versus evil. It was about men following orders, fighting for causes they only partially understood, trying to survive. Sometimes, in quiet moments between battles, the humanity broke through. Sometimes enemy soldiers recognized each other as men rather than targets. The advance continued for 3 days. German forces pushed east, British forces retreated, then counterattacked, then retreated again. The front line shifted back and forth across the same ground like a pendulum. Each side gained and lost the same positions repeatedly. Weber's company took casualties. Machine gun fire. Artillery. Heat exhaustion. On July 20, Private Joseph Klein collapsed during a march. Heatstroke. He died before medics could reach him. The water Weber had brought from the well had bought Klein 48 additional hours of life. Not enough. On July 21, Corporal Hartmann was wounded during an artillery barrage. Shrapnel in both legs. He was evacuated to a field hospital, then shipped to Germany for treatment. Weber never saw him again. By July 23, Weber's company had been reduced to 40% strength. Reinforcements arrived from the rear, fresh troops who had not experienced the desert fighting. They were confident, energetic, eager to engage the enemy. Weber watched them with the detachment of a veteran, though he had been in Africa for less than a month. Desert combat aged men quickly. The new troops did not understand this yet. On July 24, Weber's squad was assigned to defensive positions near the same rocky outcrop where they had been trapped on July 18. The same terrain. The same tactical situation reversed. Now the Germans held the high ground. Now British forces approached from the west. At 1400 hours, British troops attacked. Artillery bombardment first. Then infantry advancing behind armored support. The pattern was familiar. Weber had experienced it from both sides now. He took position behind a rock wall, checked his rifle, prepared ammunition. Standard procedure. The training took over. Load. Aim. Fire. Reload. British soldiers appeared across the sand, advancing in extended line formation. Weber aimed at the nearest figure. Squeezed the trigger. The rifle recoiled. The figure dropped. He did not think about the man he had just shot. Thinking was dangerous in combat. Hesitation got you killed. He loaded another round, acquired another target, fired again. The British advance faltered. Machine gun fire from German positions was too intense. The attackers took cover, returned fire, but could not move forward. After 30 minutes, they began withdrawing. Weber watched them retreat. Among the retreating figures, he tried to identify individuals. Thompson. Walsh. The soldiers who had given him water. But at 200 meters, all soldiers looked identical. Uniforms, helmets, weapons. No faces. No names. At 1600 hours, the firing stopped. Both sides settled into defensive positions. Stalemate again. The pattern repeating endlessly. Weber sat with his back against the rock wall, drinking from his canteen. Water. Warm, tasting of metal, but sufficient. He had learned to ration carefully. 2 swallows every hour. Make the canteen last 12 hours between refills. Private Hans Richter sat beside him. New arrival, 20 years old, in Africa for 1 week. You shot 3 of them, Richter said. I counted. Weber did not respond. Good shooting. Clean hits. They were just targets. Enemy soldiers. Men. Richter looked confused. What? They are men. Not targets. Men with families, homes, reasons for fighting. Same as us. They are trying to kill us. Yes. And we are trying to kill them. That is war. So we shoot them. Yes. But you hesitated. I saw you. Before firing. You hesitated. Weber had not realized his hesitation was visible. He tried to explain. 5 days ago, 2 British soldiers gave me water. Saved my life. Saved Klein's life, Schneider's, all of us. They could have shot me. They chose mercy. So now I shot at British soldiers. Maybe I killed one of them. Thompson or Walsh. The men who helped me. Richter did not understand. How could he? He had not shared water with the enemy. He had not experienced the cognitive dissonance of killing men who might have shown him mercy days earlier. You feel guilty? Richter asked. No. Not guilty. Confused. War should be simple. Enemy is enemy. You shoot them. But it is not simple. Sometimes the enemy is not enemy. Sometimes they are just men following orders, same as us. At 1800 hours, a messenger arrived from company headquarters. New orders. The company would withdraw at 2000 hours, pull back 3 kilometers, establish new defensive positions. The British were massing for a major counterattack. German forces were consolidating for the defense. Weber helped prepare for withdrawal. Equipment packed. Weapons cleaned. Ammunition counted. At 1930, artillery fire erupted from British positions. Heavy bombardment. 25-pounder guns. The shells landed systematically, walking across German defensive lines, covering their withdrawal routes. Weber took cover in a shell crater. The barrage continued for 20 minutes. Explosions, smoke, the whistle of incoming shells, the crash of impact. He pressed himself into the sand, making himself small, praying each shell would miss. One shell landed 5 meters from his crater. The blast wave lifted him, threw him against the crater wall. His ears rang. His vision blurred. He tasted blood. When the barrage ended, he checked himself for wounds. No major injuries. Bruises, scrapes, ringing in his ears that would not stop. He climbed out of the crater. Around him, the landscape was transformed. New craters, destroyed equipment, wounded men calling for medics. The company had taken casualties during the barrage. Weber found his squad. 3 men remaining. Richter, Schneider, and Weber himself. The others were dead or wounded or lost. The withdrawal began at 2015. The company moved west in small groups, using darkness for concealment. British patrols were active, probing German positions, testing the withdrawal. At 2100 hours, Weber's group encountered a British patrol. Both sides saw each other simultaneously at 30 meters. For a moment, nobody fired. Surprise. Darkness. Uncertainty about numbers and positions. Then weapons raised. Shots fired. Men scattered. Weber ran left, diving behind a sand dune. Machine gun fire tore through the air above his head. The firefight lasted 3 minutes. Intense, chaotic, close range. Then silence. The British withdrew. The Germans continued their retreat. Weber emerged from cover. He checked his weapon. Still functional. He looked for his squad. Richter was dead. Shot through the chest. Schneider was wounded. Bullet through the shoulder. Weber helped Schneider walk. They moved slowly, supporting each other, following the route marked by company headquarters. At 2300 hours, they reached the new defensive line. Other survivors were gathering. Medics were treating wounded. Officers were reorganizing units, combining decimated squads into provisional platoons. Weber turned Schneider over to the medics, then found a position and sat down. He was exhausted. The ringing in his ears persisted. His hands trembled. An officer approached. Captain Steiner, company commander. Private Weber. Yes, sir. Report from July 18th. You obtained water for your squad while trapped behind enemy lines. Yes, sir. How did you accomplish this? Weber hesitated. The truth was complicated. Explaining that British soldiers had helped him required explaining mercy shown by the enemy, which contradicted military doctrine. I found a well, sir. Behind British positions. I crawled there at night, filled containers, returned to my squad. Steiner nodded. Initiative. Resourcefulness. Important qualities. You are promoted to corporal. Effective immediately. Thank you, sir. Steiner walked away. Weber sat alone, newly promoted, surrounded by the sounds of war preparing for the next engagement. The Battle of El Alamein continued through October 1942. German and Italian forces defended their positions. British and Commonwealth forces attacked repeatedly, each assault larger and more coordinated than the last. Weber survived. He was wounded twice, minor injuries both times. Shrapnel in the leg on August 3, concussion from artillery blast on September 12. He recovered quickly, returned to duty, continued fighting. On November 4, 1942, British forces broke through German defensive lines. The breakthrough was decisive. Rommel ordered full retreat. The Afrika Corps began withdrawing west across Libya, abandoning equipment, supplies, positions they had held for months. Weber's unit retreated with the rest. They walked through desert they had fought over, passing familiar positions, wells, outcrops. Each location held memories. Men who had died there. Battles fought, won, lost. On November 18, Weber's company stopped at a well for water. He recognized it immediately. The same well. The stone construction. The rope and bucket. He approached slowly, looking at the ground around the well. The sand had been disturbed many times since July. Countless soldiers had drawn water here. British. German. Italian. Commonwealth. The well served them all equally. Weber drew water, filled his canteen, drank. The water tasted the same. Clean. Cool. Life-sustaining. He thought about Thompson and Walsh. The British soldiers who had helped him. He did not know their fate. Dead probably. Casualties of the campaign. Buried in the desert or shipped home to England in wooden boxes. Or perhaps they survived. Perhaps they were still fighting, advancing east now with the 8th Army, pursuing German forces. Perhaps they would reach this well again, drink from it, remember the night they shared water with an enemy soldier. Weber finished drinking and moved on. The retreat continued. The Afrika Corps reached Tunisia in December 1942. They established defensive positions, received reinforcements, prepared for the final stand in North Africa. Weber fought through winter and into spring 1943. His company was reduced repeatedly, rebuilt with fresh troops, reduced again. The cycle repeated until the original members were all dead or evacuated. Weber was one of the last survivors from July 1942. On May 7, 1943, Allied forces captured Tunis. German resistance in North Africa collapsed. Organized surrender began. On May 13, 1943, Weber's unit surrendered to British forces near Zaguin. They laid down their weapons, formed columns, marched into captivity. Weber joined them, walking between lines of British soldiers who guarded the prisoners. He searched their faces. Looking for Thompson. Looking for Walsh. Hoping to see the men who had shown him mercy 11 months earlier. He did not find them. Among thousands of British soldiers, 2 specific men were invisible. Or perhaps they were dead. Probably dead. The prisoners were loaded onto trucks, transported to temporary camps, then shipped to permanent prisoner-of-war facilities. Weber was sent to a camp in Egypt, then transferred to a camp in England in 1944. He spent 2 years in captivity. The war ended in May 1945. Weber was repatriated to Germany in 1947. He returned to Bavaria. His family's farm still stood, though damaged by Allied bombing. His parents were alive. His younger brother had been killed on the Eastern Front in 1944. Weber helped rebuild the farm. He married in 1949. He had 3 children. He never spoke about the war except when directly asked, and even then his answers were brief, factual, devoid of emotion. But he thought about it. Particularly he thought about the night at the well. Thompson and Walsh. Enemy soldiers who chose mercy. The handshake. The escort through British lines. The humanity that persisted despite the inhumanity of war. In 1963, Weber traveled to England. His stated purpose was tourism. His actual purpose was different. He went to London first, then to military archives, searching for records. Thompson, Michael. Walsh, David. 2nd Battalion, Rifle Brigade. 8th Army. North Africa, 1942. The archives were incomplete. Many records had been destroyed during the war. But Weber found fragments. Service records. Casualty reports. Lance Corporal Michael Thompson. Killed in action, October 28, 1942, near El Alamein. Buried at the El Alamein War Cemetery. Private David Walsh. Killed in action, November 2, 1942, near El Alamein. Buried at the El Alamein War Cemetery. Both men died during the final British assault that broke through German lines. Both died within 5 days of each other. Both were buried in the desert they had fought over. Weber traveled to Egypt. He obtained permission to visit the cemetery. He flew to Cairo, hired a driver, traveled north to the coast. The El Alamein War Cemetery contains 7,367 graves. Commonwealth soldiers. British, Australian, New Zealand, South African, Indian. All killed during the North African campaign. Weber walked among the headstones, reading names, searching. The cemetery was organized by unit and date of death. He found the section for October-November 1942. Found the Rifle Brigade graves. Thompson's grave was in row 17. Simple white headstone. Name, rank, unit, date of death. Age 24. Walsh's grave was in row 23. Same design. Age 21. Weber stood before each grave in turn. He did not speak. He had no words adequate to the occasion. Instead he simply stood, remembering the night at the well, the water shared, the handshake. 2 enemy soldiers had shown mercy when mercy made no tactical sense. They had helped him survive. They had risked military discipline, possibly their lives, to ensure he could return to his squad with water. He had repaid that mercy by shooting at British soldiers for 4 more months. Perhaps he had even killed them himself, though he would never know. The chaos of combat made attribution impossible. But they had saved him. And he had survived the war. And they had not. The inequality of survival. The arbitrariness of fate. These were the foundations of guilt that veterans carried. Not guilt for what they had done, but guilt for still being alive when better men were dead. Weber placed small stones on each grave. An old tradition. He had brought them from Bavaria. River stones, smooth, gray. 1 on Thompson's grave. 1 on Walsh's. Then he walked away. He left the cemetery, returned to Cairo, flew back to England, then to Germany. He never spoke about this trip. His wife knew only that he had visited England. His children knew nothing. The visit remained private, personal, a debt acknowledged if not repaid. Franz Weber died in 1987 at age 68. Heart attack. Quick. Relatively painless. At his funeral, his son found a wooden box among his father's possessions. Inside were military documents, medals Weber had never displayed, photographs from North Africa. And a photograph of 2 headstones in El Alamein War Cemetery. Thompson and Walsh. The son did not understand the significance. He asked his mother. She explained what little she knew. His father had visited those graves in 1963. British soldiers. Something that happened during the war. The son researched. He contacted British military archives, requested information about Thompson and Walsh, explained his father's connection to them. The archives responded. They had limited information. Both men served in the Rifle Brigade. Both were killed at El Alamein. Standard records. Nothing unusual. But attached to the response was a letter. Written by David Walsh to his family in July 1942. The letter had been donated to the archives by Walsh's niece in 1985. The son translated it from English to German. Read it carefully. The relevant passage. Yesterday evening something strange happened. Thompson and I were at the well collecting water when we encountered a German soldier doing the same. We could have shot him. He was alone, unarmed, stealing water from behind our lines. But he was so thirsty, so desperate, that we helped him instead. We filled his containers, escorted him back through our positions, let him return to his unit. Thompson said afterward that maybe in this war, small acts of mercy are the only things that prove we are still human. I think he is right. Weber had never known about the letter. He died believing his debt was unpaid, believing Thompson and Walsh had disappeared into history without acknowledgement. But Walsh had written about it. Had documented the encounter. Had preserved the memory of that night at the well. The son shared this information with military historians. The story was published in academic journals, then in popular military history magazines. It became a small footnote in the larger narrative of the North African campaign. In 2003, a British veteran named Geoffrey Turner read about the incident. He had served in the 8th Army at El Alamein, same period as Thompson and Walsh, though in a different battalion. Turner wrote to Weber's son. In his letter, he explained that acts of mercy between enemies were more common than official histories acknowledged. Soldiers on both sides occasionally showed humanity, occasionally recognized their shared condition as men trapped in violent circumstances beyond their control. The war, Turner wrote, was fought by men who mostly did not hate each other personally. Hatred was abstract, ideological, imposed by governments and propaganda. But in specific moments, person to person, the hatred dissolved. Soldiers saw each other as men. Sometimes that recognition led to mercy. Turner's letter prompted additional research. Military historians conducted interviews with surviving North African veterans. Several recalled similar incidents. Water shared. Wounded enemies treated. Truces during sandstorms. Small violations of military protocol driven by human compassion. These stories had been suppressed or forgotten because they contradicted the necessary narrative of war as absolute conflict between good and evil. Acknowledging that enemies sometimes showed mercy complicated the moral clarity required to maintain military morale and public support. But the stories persisted. Veterans remembered. They told their families. They wrote letters. They visited graves. In 2012, the town of Traunstein in Bavaria, where Weber had lived, erected a small memorial in the town square. The memorial commemorated local soldiers who served in World War II, with particular emphasis on Weber's story. The inscription read, "They were enemies. They chose mercy. In this, they were more than soldiers." British veterans attended the dedication ceremony, including several who had served at El Alamein. They placed wreaths. They shook hands with German veterans. They acknowledged the complexity of shared history. In 2015, a documentary filmmaker interviewed Thompson's daughter and Walsh's niece. Both women were elderly by then, in their 70s. Neither had known their fathers well. Thompson's daughter was 2 years old when her father deployed to Africa. Walsh's niece had not been born until after the war. But they had inherited the story through letters, family memory, historical research. They understood that their fathers had chosen mercy when mercy was not required, when mercy contradicted military logic, when mercy demonstrated that even in war, humanity persists. The filmmaker asked Thompson's daughter what she thought about her father's choice. Her response: "He died 4 months after helping that German soldier. He gained nothing from his mercy. But the German survived the war. Had children. Lived a full life. My father's mercy created that life. In a war where millions died, he saved one. That matters." The documentary aired on British television in 2016. It was well received. The story resonated because it humanized the enemy, because it showed that war is not absolute, because it demonstrated that even in violence, choice exists. Other veterans contacted the filmmaker. They shared similar stories. An American soldier who shared rations with a wounded German in France. A Russian soldier who let German prisoners drink from a well during the retreat from Stalingrad. A Japanese soldier who gave water to Australian prisoners on the Thai-Burma Railway. The pattern was consistent. Small acts of mercy. Individual soldiers choosing humanity over military logic. These acts changed nothing strategically. The war continued. People still died. But the acts mattered to the individuals involved. In 2018, the El Alamein War Cemetery added a plaque near the graves of Thompson and Walsh. The plaque explained the incident of July 18, 1942. It included Weber's name. It acknowledged that enemies sometimes recognize their shared humanity. Visitors to the cemetery now learn about this story. They stand at the graves, read the plaque, contemplate the complexity of war. The story has become part of the historical record. Not a central part. Not a decisive moment that changed the war's outcome. But a human moment that illuminates something essential about the nature of conflict. War creates enemies. But enemies are not absolutes. They are men with families, beliefs, reasons for fighting. Sometimes, in quiet moments, those men recognize each other's humanity. Sometimes they choose mercy. That choice does not end the war. It does not prevent future violence. But it proves that even in war, we retain the capacity to see each other as human. Thompson and Walsh chose mercy. Weber survived because of that choice. Years later, he honored their memory by visiting their graves, by remembering their names, by ensuring the story was preserved. The three men never met again after that night at the well. Thompson and Walsh died in combat. Weber survived, lived a full life, died in peace. But the moment they shared persists. It has outlasted the war, outlasted the men themselves, become part of the historical narrative of the North African campaign. In a war that killed millions, three men chose humanity over hatred for the length of time it takes to share water from a well. That choice echoes still. The well still stands in the Qattara Depression, 60 kilometers south of El Alamein. The stone construction has weathered decades of desert storms. The rope and bucket are gone, but the structure remains. Local guides sometimes bring tourists there. They tell the story of the night three soldiers met at the well. German and British. Enemies. Men. The accuracy of their telling varies. Some details are invented. Others are misremembered. But the core truth persists. Water was shared. Mercy was shown. Humanity broke through the barriers of war. Visitors ask questions. Why did Thompson and Walsh help Weber? Why risk military discipline? Why aid the enemy? The guides have learned to answer, because they were thirsty. Because Weber was thirsty. Because water is not a weapon. Because in that moment, they chose to be men rather than soldiers. This answer satisfies some visitors. Others want deeper explanation. They search for moral lessons, strategic implications, philosophical insights. But perhaps the event requires no deeper explanation. Perhaps it was simply what it appeared to be, three men at a well, sharing water, recognizing their common humanity despite being enemies. War creates abstractions. Nations, ideologies, causes. These abstractions justify violence, make killing possible, allow men to shoot at other men without confronting the reality of what they are doing. But abstractions fail at close range. When you see another man's face, hear his voice, recognize his thirst as identical to your own, the abstraction dissolves. Thompson and Walsh saw Weber's face. They recognized his desperation. They chose mercy. That choice did not change the war. German forces continued fighting. British forces continued attacking. Men died. The conflict continued for 8 more months in North Africa, then 3 more years in Europe. But the choice changed Weber. It gave him a memory he carried for 45 years. A memory that contradicted everything military training had taught him about enemies, about war, about the necessity of hatred. Thompson and Walsh proved that enemies could choose mercy. That proof became the foundation of Weber's understanding of the war, his understanding of himself, his understanding of what it meant to survive when better men died. He visited their graves. He honored their memory. He told the story to his family, though he struggled to explain why it mattered so much to him. Perhaps he could not explain because the meaning was pre-verbal, existing in the realm of experience rather than language. The meaning was in the act itself. Water shared. Hands shaken. Men recognizing each other as men. After the war ended, Weber lived 52 years. He farmed. He raised children. He participated in his community. He was, by all accounts, a good man. Kind. Reliable. Present for his family. But the war was always with him. In quiet moments. In dreams. In memories he could not share because they were too complex, too contradictory, too human. The war was supposed to have been simple. Good versus evil. Germany versus the Allies. Victory or defeat. But Weber's experience was not simple. It was filled with moral complexity, with moments of mercy and violence intertwined, with the recognition that enemies were men, and men were capable of both cruelty and compassion. The night at the well embodied this complexity. It proved that war does not eliminate humanity, it only obscures it. Sometimes the obscurity lifts. Sometimes men see clearly. Sometimes they choose mercy. Those moments do not end wars. But they prove that even in war, choice exists. Even when killing is required, mercy remains possible. Even between enemies, humanity persists. Thompson and Walsh chose mercy once, on a July night in 1942, at a well in the North African desert. They died 4 months later, killed in battle, their choice having no impact on the war's outcome. But their choice impacted Weber. It allowed him to survive, to return home, to live a full life. And it gave him a story. A memory of humanity persisting in inhumane circumstances. That memory outlasted the war. It outlasted Thompson, Walsh, and Weber himself. It became history. It became a reminder that war is fought by men, and men are more than their uniforms, more than their nationalities, more than their orders. They are men. Capable of mercy. Even in the middle of a firefight. Even when sharing water makes no tactical sense. Even when the enemy might kill them tomorrow. Water was shared. Humanity was recognized. 3 soldiers at a well, for one night, were more than enemies. They were men who chose mercy. That choice echoes across 80 years, a quiet testament to the possibility of humanity surviving even the worst that humans create.